Crazy God story. I'm here with my buddy Brandon, and this guy's story blows me away. God has led him to this amazing place in his life because he's living by faith, and he is working in Pakistan to buy slaves, set them free, and give them a whole brand new life. And man, tell us about your story, man. How did God get you there? What did it look like?
I mean, it's crazy, right? I mean, it's crazy to think about going somewhere like that. And I mean, I think we've talked about this before. It's all of these little steps that we take. It's not this one thing and then it happened. But I think for me, the beginning of everything was really kind of putting down my own selfish desires. So I grew up, went to college, graduated, and had this goal of what I thought I wanted to do, and I wanted to do real estate and make all this money and do all this stuff. But when I boiled it down, it was all about me. And so God kind of interjected. It wasn't that I wasn't, looking for him or trying to know him better, but he kind of came into my situation and was like, "Hey, this isn't your dream, or this is your dream, but this isn't my dream." And it kind of went on this crazy course of events and led me into ministry. But I think, when I talk about what we're doing in Pakistan, I really like people to know that it's all about a faithful step and a faithful step. It's all about these little things that lead you there. And I couldn't have gone to Pakistan if I hadn't gone to Brazil. Couldn't have gone to Brazil if I wouldn't have done the thing before and been faithful in certain seasons. I'm a big believer in seasons, not only preparing us and testing us. And James, talks about the testing of our faith. It talks about that's more precious than anything else. And so those hard times that we try to run from, the wilderness that we try to run from, if I wouldn't have gone through those seasons, I wouldn't have been able to do what I'm doing now, because it's not like it somehow just gets easier. The stuff that God's laid on my heart and dreams that now me and the team have for Pakistan and what we're going to try to do there, and some other countries, I mean, they're huge. And so I have no idea how it's going to get done, but I know that so many times before, all of these roadblocks that I faced, God has just miraculously kind of just pushed them to the side because of the obedience that I had, and the call that I had. So hopefully that kind of gives you a rough, answer.
Yeah, and the obedience is so incredibly important because you've talked to me about at length about your story, and you, by every human standard, you were incredibly successful a couple different times. Like your career, you were incredibly successful, and God said, "This is your dream for your life, not mine." And you got into ministry, and then you were incredibly successful in ministry. You started with this little tiny church that grew into a mega church, and again, God basically said, "This is your dream, not mine," and you had to step away from that, to where you had all this success, and God said, "That's not the kind of success I want you to have." So,
And I think part of that is we all struggle with different things. All of us are gonna. It's hard for us to accomplish what we need to accomplish, and part of those things for me is pride. And so I had to go through, I believe, these seasons, and God doesn't cause pain. God doesn't, but God uses all of that to kind of form us and mold us and push us to where He wants us to go. And so there's these incredibly, hard seasons that I went through, and walking away from things that I thought were the thing. And I've had to do that multiple times. And we talked about it before we started recording, but I think about Abraham all the time. And I think about the dream that God gave him. And for far too long, and still even today, when I'm getting ready to go up to the mountain and sacrifice for God, I always try to bring my own ram up, because it's less painful that way. But there's no obedience in that. And the blessings from heaven don't show up until you really sacrifice it. And I've told people there's two options I have. Option one is we save a bunch of people from slavery. We do all this amazing stuff. I go broke doing it. I lose the house, I lose everything. And I write a book about the goodness of God, and it becomes a New York Times bestseller. Option two is everything works out. God does amazingly, more than I could even hope or imagine. And, maybe hundreds of thousands of people get saved and a region gets changed. And I still write a book about the goodness of God. Either way, either scenario, right? Because I don't know what the future looks like. But the goodness of God is the thread that goes the whole way, regardless of what I see with my eyes. The one thing that I can't describe and to tell people is when you go and you lead worship service to slaves who have nothing, they're going to be beaten, they're going to be killed, raped, sold, you name it, burned alive. The stories are just horrendous. And they show up to these services that we do, arms stretched out, crying, And I asked this interpreter, I said, what are they saying? He said, they're saying things like, God, you're all I've got, but you're all I need. And it kind of does something with you when you're like, I go to church and I'm like, hey, my latte isn't, the right flavor, or
Yeah.
hey man, we're running 10 minutes late, and they're going, God, you're all I have. And so it's kind of messed with my mind a little bit, because it's like, I think for far too long I've been kind of, manipulated in my own desires and stuff of what church should be. And I go over and I meet these people that have really no selfish ambition, and I see them show up and they're worshiping in a way where it seems like they know God better than me. And so I'm sitting here going, all right, God, I don't know how having nothing could make them know you better. And I hope that everything isn't taken away from me, but I want to know them like they know you. And that's something that's a hard thing. And that's, I
Yeah.
think, the most important thing for everyone. We have to, when we, these crazy God stories you talk about, we have to say, God, I feel like I want to do this thing, but what do you want my heart to look like? Because if I choose what I think is important, I can tell you my marriage won't be good. My relationships with my kids won't be good. What I do in my life, it won't be fulfilling or worth it. How many people, and you meet them all the time, right? They literally go, oh my gosh, thank God it's Friday. I'm living for Friday night and Saturday. And then Sunday comes around. I used to do this. And I would sit there and go, I don't want to do that next week. I don't want to go back to work. It's because I wasn't in the zone. I wasn't in the will of God. And now I'm sitting here going, time is just flying by. But so many people live life with regret. At the end of their lives, they've done these studies. There's two things people regret at the end of their lives. I wish I would have spent more time with my family, and I wish I would have taken more risks. And so when I talk about God and I talk about people, it's like, take a risk. You can always go
Yeah.
back to what you're doing, but you can't always go back and take a risk. And so I think that's
Yeah.
super important.
Yeah. I one of the things that I'm thankful for is, like, I have made obedience to God a habit in my life. And I've heard so many people that said, man, God gave me this opportunity this one time and I was scared or I didn't do it. And they live in this constant perpetual regret over it. I went to Kenya in 2012 on a mission trip, and the cost was like $12,000.
Wow.
I didn't have that. I was running a nonprofit mechanic company at the time. I had no regular income. And we had this Sunday where you had to show up to this meeting if you were going on the trip. And if you show up at this meeting, you're committing to $12,000, right? Because we had to, the next day, we had to buy our tickets, book our rooms and all that kind of stuff. Because, there's like travel deadlines and stuff that we had to meet. And so I have no idea where this 12 grand is coming from. So I'm like, you know what? But this is what God wants for me. What my wife was like, this is what you need to do. You need to go on this trip. And so I show up to this meeting, and as I'm going there, this lady who didn't know my financial situation at all, she walks up to me and says, here's a check for 12 grand. Right. I mean, she knew I was going on the trip. She just didn't know I didn't have the money to do it. And so she said, I'm paying for you to go. Right. God put it on my heart. Now, here's what's a trip. There was another couple that didn't go to that meeting. They were a little bit older, because they didn't have $24,000.
Yeah.
They didn't go on that trip. Well, we ended up doing a bunch of fundraising and things like that to buy, all the things we needed for this trip.
Yeah.
And the mission budget for our church after everything had $24,000 in it, which if they would have shown up to that meeting, their tickets, everything would have been paid for, and they've lived in regret ever since. They got to this point where, we were talking about this, there was no way forward. And God is going, I want you to walk into that corner where the Egyptian army is on one side coming to kill you, and the Red Sea that you can't cross is on the other side. And he's going, I want you to follow me into that corner. And so people, often say, okay, well, faith is, some people have bigger faith than others. And I always go back to, Jesus said, you just need a mustard seed, something that, because Moses didn't, when he's going there, you look at the situation, Moses and the Israelites, they're not like, yes, God's going to come through. They're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
But they still, kept going. And in the history of the world at that point, God had never parted water the way that he did with the Red Sea. But what did God say? Stick out your arm, stick out your staff. And Moses did it. And God did this thing that nobody had ever seen before. You know?
I think when you think about stuff, keep going.
And so just the last thing real quick, one of the things that I think God wants to do with our lives, is make it to where it's really unexplainable apart from Him. And this is something that I think is so important. Like, He wants, when we tell our stories, for us to have to include Him in it.
Yeah.
He wants us to live in a way where it's like you have to point your life to God. And if I can tell my story about my life and leave God out of it, that's not what Jesus wants for us. He wants every single person. He said, Matthew 5:16, let your light shine before men so they see your good deeds and glorify your Father who is in heaven. That's for every believer. So I want to go a little bit into what you're doing right now, like with the slaves, how are you freeing? Because this is a new thing for you, right? Like, you just started doing this a couple months ago, and you're seeing God do these crazy, ridiculous things to make this happen, where He's, changing a region. And it was, and what I was going to say, you talked about how at the end, you're going to write a book about the goodness of God, right?
Yeah.
And it may be this hard, painful, crazy road that's full of turmoil, or it may be smooth sailing, but ultimately that book is going to show that what happened is impossible apart from God. And eternity was changed for people because of the goodness of God. Yeah. And it was only because of the goodness of God. And when you write that book, you won't be able to write it and leave God out.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. I think when I think about, even getting to Pakistan, so I was in Brazil, and these ladies had this vision. They came and saw me and all this crazy stuff. But when I think about going to Pakistan, I didn't even want to go there, to be honest. God opened up a door. I was going to go to another country, and I had all of these churches lined up. It was one of these things I was like, this is amazing. But then because of COVID regulations, travel requirements changed. And I'm sitting here going, what's going on? Like, God, you told me that I was supposed to do this thing, and I feel like these doors are shutting. And all I kept hearing was, do you trust me or not? And so this crazy opportunity, it's just a guy who reached out to me on Facebook, and that happens all the time. But I really felt like God was saying go. And so I went there, not really knowing anything. When I went to Pakistan, I didn't really know.
Okay.
I started talking with them, and it wasn't like I was making these crazy decisions. Kind of.
No,
and I shared with you before. I said,
hold on. I just want to inject something real quick, because I think this is really important. And I don't want to forget this. And I think this is important.
Yeah.
One of the things Jesus taught is that if we're faithful over a little bit, He'll give us more responsibility. If we're not faithful with what God's given us, He'll take away even what we have. And so for you, you had what you described as like your dream job. Like, you had gone to school, got a job, got a degree in finance. You were working that, making stupid money, on track to make like just ridiculous, stupid amounts of money.
Yeah,
right?
we would have lived. It was the quote unquote American dream. I got to put in, if I can get 10 more years, once these people retire, I can do this. And you kind of like map it out in your head, and you're sitting there going, this is looking pretty. We get to take the vacations. We can have the nice cars. We can do whatever. And then what is what I started thinking.
And you would even be able to retire early with a just stupid amount of money, where you could spend the rest of your life just enjoying life. But God said, that's your dream, not mine. So you left that, went into a ministry that blew up, this small church that blew up, that turned into a mega church. And again, God said, this isn't where I want you. So you took this step of obedience and left that. And I know you had some other travel and some other ministry things that, you were going to get into down in South America. And eventually God again said no to that. And you kept being obedient. And this is so important, because God is looking for people that are going to be faithful to what he tells us. And so, you've got this, somebody reached out to you randomly out of the blue from Pakistan on Facebook. Yeah. And I look at this, and you had a habit of obedience to God when it didn't make sense. It made sense to God. In God's economy, it made sense. To man's economy, people would have looked at every time you obeyed God to leave where you were at and went, why would you leave that? You had all this success. You were, but God is looking for people that are going to listen to Him. And if at any point you wouldn't have obeyed, you would have missed out. And I believe that this guy from Pakistan that reached out to you, he would have reached out to somebody else that God knew was going to be faithful. So God, when he orchestrated this, he knew the decisions you were going to make. And so he said, yeah, my son, my son Brandon, he's going to obey. And so I'm going to put him into this position to give him this opportunity to see me do something that most people just, it'll blow their mind. So
yeah, and
sorry,
the only reason they saw me was because I actually preached when I was preaching in Brazil. They saw a sermon I did in Brazil. Randomly across the world, they saw a sermon I did down there, and then God said, "That's the guy. So you need to reach out to him." But when I landed there, it was one of these things where there was just so much peace on this trip. There was so much peace being there, even though I went there completely alone. I didn't know anybody. I mean, I talked to him on WhatsApp and stuff like that. I didn't know anybody. I went there by myself. I didn't have an organization behind me. I was just like, hey, let's buy a plane ticket and check it out, right? And so you go there. It's crazy. And then you're sitting there going, and God kept bringing up Exodus to me and just saying, do you trust me? And so then I was like, okay, well, who do you guys work with? I'll come over and preach. And they're like, well, we work a lot with the slave community. And I made the mistake. I call it a mistake, but it was obviously a God thing. And I said, they're slaves. Well, what do they do? And he said, well, they make bricks. And I said, oh, like the children of Israel. And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, can you buy them? And he goes, yeah, you can. And I was like, okay. And it was just those things. I got in this zone where I was just like, yep, sure. We get over there. Now we've got a school with 152 slave kids. We're going to build that up to 600 kids in this school. Then we're going to build another school and another school. We've got now a pipeline of people. So we're buying them out of slavery. And people are like, well, what did they do to get there? Most of the people are actually born into it, fourth, fifth generation slaves. And all we're doing is whatever the debt is that their family owes, we're just satisfying the debt. So legally, these slave owners have to release these people because the only thing they have is this debt. And so the law states if the debt's satisfied, those people get released. And so on the second group, just to give you some numbers, ended up costing us $254 US per person to buy them. Wow. And then for 4 months, we might extend it to 6 months. We pay for housing, we pay for food, we get them to go to the doctor, all this type of stuff. And then for 4 to 6 months, while we're taking care of them, usually within a month or two, we can get them work, we get all that type of stuff, and we get them connected into different communities. But there's 4.5 million, roughly. I mean, anywhere between 3 and 4.5. The estimates are Christian slaves in the country, and it's legal. And you're sitting there going, sometimes it feels even too overwhelming, right? It's like, well, I can't save everybody, and it's like, all right, but I never in a million years thought I would buy one slave, let alone now 70. And there's more every single month. And the more that the money comes in, we're just going to keep buying more, and we're going to keep doing more. And we're going to start planting businesses over there, and we're going to change a region. And honestly, the people of Pakistan, they were so welcoming. All the things that I thought, I mean, God just gave us so much favor over there with the government officials and with his people, and just sitting there going, we're not going over there to be some sort of selfish, whatever. We just want to help the people. And it's really resonating over there. And there's some things that, we can't talk about, but God is just opening up these doors. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, where does this stop? Like, it's just like, just keep on going. But the people over there and my team over there, their faith is just, it's crazy. And so I call them and we're going over stuff, and they're like, well, we just got back from the Afghanistan border doing this. And I'm just like, I said, aren't you guys worried about, security? And they said, why would we be worried about security if our life is to glorify God? It's just a different, and to even go over there, I think I've shared this with you before. I had a conversation with a guy, and I've heard, you've heard people say, is Jesus the Lord of your life? And it's true, right? Is he Lord of your finances? All that type of stuff. It's all good. But he kind of phrased it a different way. And I said, before I went over there, I said, listen, I know this is going to sound crazy. And he goes, are you asking my permission? I said, I just want to know if I'm crazy. Everybody tells me, other than my wife, they're saying, you're crazy. And he said this, he goes, are you willing to die for him or not? And that hit me different. And I was sitting there going, is this really, do I really believe it? It's either true, this book, it's either true or it's not true. Well, if it's true, then I need to act like it's true. And so I was like, you know what? I'm ready to take these risks. But again, I say that and people are like, oh, I could never do that. 10 years prior it all started. You know what I mean? It was just these little building blocks. And when you take a risk, you leave a job and then God provides. You leave another job and God provides. It's those things that build on top of each other. And what I would say is the risk never goes down. the risk and everything kind of increases, but my faith along with that is kind of like following it, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
it still hurts.
absolutely.
It's still, and people are going, man, I don't know how you're doing that. And it's like, I don't know. I tell people, I was like, there's not, those books, whatever for dummies, learn the internet, learn the whatever. There's not like a, hey, start a nonprofit and go and try to change regions of the world 101 book.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. And so it's like, all God says is read this thing, pray to me, ask me for help, do what I tell you to do. It's a pretty simple, kind of
Yeah.
formula.
And a lot of times, I just go back to, people are like, well, how do you hear from God? And I think, it really starts with, are you doing the real basic things the Bible says? Because if you're not doing the really basic things the Bible says, I don't think God's going to speak to you in any other way. I mean, the Bible is the primary way that God communicates with everybody.
Yep.
And, God's will for everybody is, first of all, get saved, and then, look at what the Bible says and start doing those things, and then if you're faithful to that, then God is like, okay, I'm going to use you in so many other ways and do other things for your life. But I want to go back and talk about the slavery conditions in Pakistan, because it's not just where they're like going out and like, capturing villages of people and bringing them in as slaves. This is my understanding is this is basically indentured servitude, where people are born into it with this family debt, and you say you bought people for $254, and for most of us, that's not like this massive amount of money. That seems small, but over there it's a gargantuan amount. And now they are working to pay off their debt, but they're also working to pay for their living situation. So basically, everything I've read is that, so, they're making, 89 cents a day for labor, but at the same time, they're being charged 90 cents a day for their really horrible house and for the, whatever food they have. So, they're being charged more. So either their debt is barely decreasing, or it's actually going up while they're living there.
I mean, you have to think about it. There could be like a family, like let's say of 7, and once the kids are old enough to walk, they're required to work, right? And so you've got 6 or 7 people, let's say, in a family, and they're working 12 to 14 hours a day, and it's, I mean, anywhere 100 to 120 degrees, right? They're in the sun. They don't get breaks. The water they drink is just this little muddy water that they're making the bricks with. And so they're all getting sick and stuff like that. But the big problem, so yes, there's that part where it's like, okay, here, we made $1 today for 7 of us working 14 hours, 14 times 7, do the math. But then the owner goes, well, I gave you a place to stay, which is a room that's like the size of my office, and there's 7 of them living in it. And, oh, by the way, I gave you 1 meal during the day, which is usually like a little bit of rice. And so they subtract that off, and then you really don't have anything. And then not just that, the other part is, and I have videos of this when we would go to buy them, they have these like ledger books. Well, most of them can't read or write. So they're like, well, how much do I owe? And the guy's like, oh, you paid off this much. How do you know that that's true? And so it's this really corrupt system. But another way that people get brought in, so a story of a family that we saved, there was a grandfather who ended up having some legal troubles with a Muslim family. And so he had some legal debt. I don't know what the problem was. And then he ended up getting sick. And so he had some hospital bills. Well, it's an old school system over there. And so when this guy passed away, well, the oldest son, you get the good and you get the bad. So this son inherited this, little bit of debt from his father, and his wife, and I think they had 4 or 5 kids. They have this debt that they have to pay. So they're selling all their stuff, but they can't pay it. And so what happens is these slave owners, if there's like 20,000 roughly brick kilns there that make bricks. Their whole, everything over there is built with bricks. So it's a huge economy over there. But they go to the jail or to the city and they say, hey, who owes debt? And so what they do is they say, hey, we'll pay for the debt that they owe you. We'll satisfy that. So the government's like, hey, here you go. And we'll let them work off the debt with us. And so that's how they can go. A lot of times when I'm talking to Americans, they're like, what do they like, default on a car loan or something? And I'm like, it's not like that. It's not like that at all. And so, but once you're in, and like another guy, he got his hand cut off. He had a job at a factory, his hand got cut off and he couldn't do anything. And so he went there as a free person to work, because you can work, if you wanted to make bricks, you can do it as a free person. But then something happened and he had some medical bills or whatever. And so he said, "Hey, can I borrow some money?" And the slave owner goes, "Sure, you can borrow a little bit of money. You can just pay it back to me. And then you're in again." So it's this system of, it's not like they have like this insurance for businesses. Hey, I lost my hands and the government's going to provide for me. It's not like that over there. And if people are familiar with like India and how there's like that caste system, it's the same thing in Pakistan. I think 98% Muslim, 2%, and most of it is Christians. But they're when you go to hotels, they're the doorman. If you have sanitary, sewer workers, it's them. And so these lower class jobs, kind of the deck is stacked against them. And so it's just a really horrible situation. But the essence of it is you can't read or write, so you're never going to be able to get out anyways. It's like, how do you even know what you owe? And that's kind of the sad part, where you're like, it's not even like the system is set up where they could really get out. And most of them don't even know people that get set free. So now we're at a point, we freed 70 people, which doesn't sound like a lot, but over there, that's huge. Most people have never met anybody, that has been set free or anything like that. And so now my team on the ground there, people are showing up at their house saying, "Can you free us?" So they've got lines of people showing up, and I'm sitting here going, "All right, God, I don't know what you want me to do, but we're just going to do our best." So
Yeah,
it's just crazy.
And when you're going over there, you've bought three groups of people basically, right? You made like three kind of purchases, and when you're buying people, you're buying like families. And
Yep.
And when you're buying them, you're not just paying off people's debt and like, "Hey, have a nice life." You're actually putting them in a position to succeed. So you're taking these people that are in this forced labor and saying, "Here's like an actual new life," and you're continuing to stay involved to make sure that they succeed, right?
Yeah, one of the coolest things is, so the trip that I went on, I said I want it to be a surprise. So I want to kind of capture it on film. I want to see their surprise. And so again, they don't know people that got set free. They've heard about it maybe, and they've been praying for it. And so this van just shows up and they're like, "Hey, so like how long until we get set free?" And it's like, "Pack your stuff and get on the van." And they're like, "What?" And so then after we purchase them, and when I say purchase, think of it as almost like a car loan. So we give them the title back to their life. There's no debt against them. And then that actually gets filed with the local municipality. It's a legal thing. So it gets filed. The paperwork gets filed. They're free and clear. The slave owner can't come back and do anything, or else he can go to prison. So these are the laws. And so we follow the rules and stuff like that. And then right now we're doing 4 months. We might extend it to 6 months, but we basically, for 4 months, we provide shelter. We give them food. We rehabilitate them. Hey, let's go to the hospital. There's a lot of like hepatitis. There's a lot of diseases and stuff. So it's like, hey, let's go to the hospital. Let's get things taken care of. And then usually within a month or two, they have jobs already. And then we just say, "Hey, for the next 2 months, we're still going to provide for you." Most of the time it's with my team. We had our first family that wanted to move away because for security reasons, they didn't feel comfortable. And I said, "You know what?" And so we got them to a city that's 4 hours away. We got them a cell phone. We're still providing for them. And then the other piece is, "Hey, let's get your kids into school. Like, we want to teach them. We'll provide the schooling for them." And so it's this thing where if we can get them self-sustained, if we can help them, like we've helped a few of them start businesses and things like that. But the economies of scale is crazy. I want to say the first group we had, there was 16 of them, or 16 of the first group. We ended up spending, I think, like $1,400 or $1,500, and that covers everything for 4 months that they would need. So the economies of scale of how far the dollar goes over there, it's crazy. It's like 35 cents a day, and they're living, good and stuff like that. And so there's some longer term goals of when we build the school out and stuff like that, where we're actually thinking about building some apartments and like transitory, kind of thing. It's like, get them in here, rehabilitate them, so we don't even have to pay for them to go anywhere else. We're going to have the housing and stuff like that, and then get them out. But the more we do this, it's going to snowball. And so then they're going to, come to church. They're going to have good jobs, and they've never had jobs, right? And people are like, "Well, aren't they going to go back to slavery?" They would rather die. They can convert from Christianity to being a Muslim and stuff like that, and they could get out of slavery. They would rather die. And so the crazy part is these people have the craziest work ethic. So for businesses and stuff like that, it's like, hey, these people are used to working 12 to 14 hours a day. every day in the heat, not complaining, because if they do, they'll get beaten or, killed or whatever. And so they have the best work ethic, and they just keep their head down. And so businesses are actually like, yeah, we would love to have them work for us, because they're the best. They're honest. And so it's, again, this is a model that I think will be replicated and grow bigger and bigger based upon like funding and stuff that we have.
Right. And so one of the things, like, I was thinking about as you're talking, the situation that they're in, yeah, part of what the money that they're making is working to pay for, their living situation while they're in slavery. And a few problems is, one, they're not making what they would if they're free and working on their own.
Yep.
And then also what they're being charged for where they're living is not legitimate. Like, they're being radically overcharged, and it's
Yes.
basically like they're making so little and being charged so much for their living so that they can never get out of that debt, and that they stay in slavery. But once they're freed and they're in, like, I guess what you'd say is the private sector, like, they're working, making what would be a livable wage.
Oh,
they're getting a fair wage, and their living expenses are fair, instead of what it was when they were in slavery. So it's really a very different situation. I want to talk also about how short of a time you've been at this, because you've made a pretty good impact already. You've been over there since when was the first time you went over there and actually purchased slaves to free them?
I think it was, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it was like mid-April,
Okay.
2022. So it's been a couple months.
And since that time, you said you've freed about 70 people, and they're not always
70.
the same price, because that $254 you said, that's not like the going rate for everybody. It depends on their debt.
The first group was like 354 per person. The second group was like 254 or 252 or something like that, and that doesn't include the housing and stuff like that. That was just the purchasing of their debt. But it's going to be probably anywhere what we're seeing, and obviously we've only done 70, but you're going to look at like probably that 250 to 350 range is a pretty accurate representation. And then if you add in, it's 35 cents a day for a living and stuff like that, and so it's anywhere but like $500 a person by far buys them out and then takes care of them for I think we're going to extend it probably to 6 months just to give a little bit more length. But that's the hard part, where you're sitting there going, man, that's what a life costs. And the more you do this, it's just crazy when you think about, and I've had to gauge my own heart, but all the stuff that I think I want, and there's nothing wrong with stuff, right? I want my kids to have nice things and stuff like that, but it's like $254 is a life. And I'm sure we're going to get in situations where there's people that have even less debt. Maybe they're not fourth or fifth generation. Maybe they just got into it, and it's like, maybe that's 100 and something bucks. I don't know what that's going to be, but it's just crazy to think about, 4.5 million or, 3 to 4.5 million people. That's just one country. I mean, there's countries around the world that still exist. And so it's just a sad, it's just hard.
Yeah, actually, I was looking at the after I talked to you the first time, I looked up like the global slave index, and almost every country in the world has some form of slavery that exists. Now, like with the Geneva Convention and things like that, slavery like what we saw in America, pre-Civil War, that's not really legal, but there's ways around it. There's ways to circumvent that. And like in Pakistan, you have this indentured servitude, which for all intents and purposes, it's slavery. There is no difference.
Oh, 100%.
The people that owe the debt, they're considered property until that debt is paid off.
Which is why we have situations where, before I got there was a situation where a couple they didn't do what they're supposed to do or something. And so the owner wanted to set example. And there was this big court case, my team over there that fought it, but they ended up throwing them into the brick kiln fire. They burned them alive. A couple of weeks ago, I got a call from one of my team members, and he said that they were doing some protests and things like that because, and you can't, over there, alcohol is illegal, but apparently one of the slave owners drank a bunch of alcohol, got drunk, and he beat a person to death. But most of the places, if it's local or area over there, they would say, well, that's that's their property, so they can do whatever they want. It's when it goes and blows up and gets more like international attention that people are like, hey, you shouldn't do this. But the stuff that's going on, there's a lot of like selling little girls, stuff like that, going around the world, stuff that human trafficking and stuff, but at a huge, really big scale. They're buying people and they're harvesting their organs. I mean, the stories that I've heard, uh, it's almost like it almost just takes you down like a wrong path. You're like, I don't even know what I can do. It's like so dark, right?
Yeah.
But it's like all we can do is what's in front of us, right? And so if that means we save a couple families a month, or if that means we can do 1,000 a month, whatever it's going to be, it's going to be great for those people.
Yeah. So what is the immediate goal right now? Like, how often are you trying to buy people? How many? Like, what's some of your immediate goals?
So I've committed to, I initially said a family a month, because I'm sitting there going, I mean, I don't know where the money's going to come from. I've been living, for 2 years on our retirement savings.
Just a spoiler alert, it's going to come from God.
Yeah. Weird. Yeah. And so already this first month after we got back, we're doing 3 families a month now. And so triple what I thought. And so I tell people we're not going to, it's a full nonprofit. I mean, so it's tax deductible, all that type of stuff. And I'm not going to turn down, if somebody want to be like, hey, I've got $10 million to give you. It's like, great. Right. Me and the board, like we already got plans, and there's just huge things that we wanted to do. But if I had to, like, while I wouldn't turn that down, we really need monthly partners. And you can do that through the website and stuff. But the reason I like the idea of the monthly partnership is I also care about the team that's on the ground there. And I said, hey, how much would it cost to pay you guys to do this full time? Because they all work full-time jobs, and then their extra money goes to this ministry as well. Like the father of the guy that I work with most of the time, he sold everything to buy the school originally. It was $10,000 to buy the school. So they're in it. And so I said, hey, man, like, how much would you guys want? I would love to pay for you guys to do this full time, and let's figure it out. And his reply to me is, we'll never accept money to do what God has called us to do in our own country. Like, crazy that these people, they're like, no, we don't want the money. We want people to get saved. And so monthly partnerships, what that does is it allows us to scale it appropriately. Now, if somebody wrote us our check, yes, we'll build schools, we'll do whatever, and it'll be amazing. But that sustained giving helps us go, the team get ready and say, hey, we've been doing 3 families. Now we're going to do 4 families. Now we're going to do 5 families. Now we're going to do 6 families. And then while we have that pipeline and that continues to go, then we say, let's build out the school. How much is it going to cost to get, and we can fit on that first site roughly 600 kids, and then we'll plant a church on top of it, because they build up, like there's multiple stories. And then it's like, hey, we're going to save money. Where's the next part of the city where we can do another school and another school and another church and another church? And it's this thing of like, we're planning on, there's a crusade next year that we potentially are going to be doing and stuff like that. But really, it's the sustained giving and the monthly partnerships that people go, we want to be a part of this long term. And if we can get that sustained giving for a long enough time, I think it just sky's the limit. It's going to be, I never in a million years thought I'd be doing this. Like, never. Yeah. But every single week when I get videos from people that, like, I have a video of this guy, and I don't know why this one just sticks out. It's the first group, but there was this man, and he was just crying, and he was just hugging on me. And he said, I've been praying. They get like 1 meal a day, and it's like basically like this, fits in their hand, right? And he would cut it in half, give the rest to his kids, and he would have this little tiny meal. For 3 years, this guy did this. For 3 years, he said, I've been fasting and praying, and I knew one day God would bring someone here to set me free. And he's just weeping on me. And I'm sitting there going, man, I've missed it my whole life. He's been doing this for, been doing his whole life, but he's been praying in faith for 3 years, fasting and praying, knowing, God, I know someone's going to come. And so I'm sitting here going, there's, 1.44 billion roughly would buy them all. But it's like, man, if we could just change a city, and then if we could change a region, then if we could change a country, and then, oh, by the way, once the blueprint works there, what's the next country? There's tons of things that I want to do. But I think the biggest thing for me is, what does God want me to do? Because we can do things that we're not called to do, and it's a good thing. It makes sense, and you're doing good work. And we're going to go eventually to the throne, and God's going to go, no, I'm going to judge you based on what I called you to do. Not what you did that was good. No. There's plenty of people that do stuff in my name. There's plenty of people that do all this stuff. the specific thing that I've called you to do. And so I know that this area, God has specifically called us to do this stuff. And so sustain giving. And yes, I would love if you always hear about those ministries and all the books that I'm sure you've read too, where it's like, so-and-so just wrote me $1 million check. And you're like, oh my gosh, I've been, so for me, for 2 years, we've been using our retirement accounts. And I don't say this as a woe is me story. God told me to do it. God said, do you trust me or not?
Yeah.
And so it is what it is. And right now, everything that we get goes over there. And eventually we'll have to sustain us here stateside with the ministry, or maybe me speaking and stuff I can do that. And 100% of the money continues to go over there, but it's really about being faithful. And so it's like, man, if I can just get monthly partnerships and even churches, it's like, hey, we'll commit to a family, for a church, these big churches, if they just said, hey, $2,000 a month would roughly buy a family, and we'll give you that. And so it's those types of things that doesn't seem, we think of these huge numbers, but it's these, to us, it's not, it's to a church budget. That's not anything.
But it's like the fishes and loaves, God is just saying, what do you have? And this kid that had, a sack lunch, some rolls, a couple of fish, that was his food. That was all he had. And Jesus fed, thousands of people with tons of leftovers. God isn't looking for, a big giant amount. We think, and you're right. We often think about, when we're following God, okay, this is how God could make this work. This would be cool if this happened. But so often God wants to keep us dependent on him. It's like I'm working on a documentary where I'm going to be traveling around talking to different people about their crazy God stories. So instead of like doing this over Zoom, I would be meeting with you in person. We'd like visit locations and things like that. And I'm going, man, I've got to raise money for it. And if someone wrote me a giant check, that'd be great. But I'm like, I'm going to trust God in his time. And what I've told people is, I don't need somebody to give me a check for, this entire amount of money. I'm like, if I get a bunch of people that just donate small amounts, it all adds up. And the same thing with you guys, And what you guys people think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, people sometimes, there's a family member of mine. She's like, well, I don't have a lot, and I said, whatever. Like, I'm not gonna pull your arm to donate. But it's like, somebody that even does 50 or 100. I mean, that could pay for a family to go to the doctor that's never been to the doctor, to get hepatitis medication, to there's people that have lost limbs and stuff over there, and they just need, a little bit of hospital work, right? And it's all these little things, and it's like, regardless of what comes in, God, there's these little asks, we're doing these little things, and it's just like, there's just enough. There's just enough. And it's, you talked about the 12,000. Before I went over there, I had $12,000 on my credit card. My wife didn't even know about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? I'll sell my truck when I get back. Like, I'm just going to sell it. But there was that burden that I had for these people that I couldn't shake. And I was crying. I was like, what, what's going on? And God's like, do you trust me or not? 2 days before I left, a church that isn't a big church at all, it's a good sized church. They randomly were like, we're going to take a goodwill offering and just tell people what you're doing. But they really couldn't tell them exactly what I was doing for security reasons. Well, they ended up taking this offering, and the pastor just said, whatever God puts on your heart, whatever that number is, put right here, and we're going to give it to him. Well, 2 days before I left, it was like 12,100 and whatever. Like, it was exactly what I needed. And God's like, do you trust me or not? Like, and you're sitting there going, and somebody said this, and it's so funny. They said something along the lines of, God almost always is just almost late. Like, it's not like I got a trip in 2 months and God, boom. It's like almost always too late.
Yeah.
It's always like down a lot of times to the last second. You're going, oh my gosh, how is this going to come together? And God's like, do you trust me or not? Like, do you trust me or not? And so it's just crazy. But then those things increase your faith, even like your project you're working on. Dude, at some point, we're going to take you to Pakistan. At some point, you're going to be able to do all this stuff. So, I mean,
I want to go. No. I want to go,
But it's like, but right now we're faithful in the things that we have, which is this, right? I'm going to be faithful.
Yeah.
We're going to do a meeting or whatever, but I know someday it's going to be down there, and it's just faithful from now until that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of with what you were saying, a lot of people say, well, God waits till the last minute. And I don't believe God waits until the last minute. I believe he waits until the best minute. It goes back to Moses and the Israelites at the Red Sea, where God is like, I'm putting you in this corner. And I want to say Exodus 14, where God tells Moses, hey, I'm going to put you in a situation that's beyond what you can handle. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, like people are like, God will never give you more than you can handle. And what makes me laugh about that is I'm like, if when Daniel was coming out of the lion's den, if someone walked up and said, brother, God will never give you more than you can handle. I mean, Daniel would laugh because,
yeah. Why don't you go spend the night down there? I don't know about that.
Because I mean, I could just imagine, Daniel going in there being like, God, I don't need your help. I got this. I can. I'm like, no, God is, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the fiery furnace when the angel or Jesus or, shows up, and they're like, no, we got it. I mean, like we're constantly in these situations that are beyond what we can handle. But I'm like, how many people have those stories encouraged? How many people have read what happened with Moses and the Israelites at the Red Sea and realized that, okay, I can keep going, so often, like, God puts us in these situations and wants us to continue to move forward to where we're in a corner and there's no way for us to solve it. God is going, like you said, do you trust me enough to let me get you in that situation so that I can get you out of the situation? And it keeps us dependent on God, and we need to be dependent on God, because on our own we will screw it up. We'll do it wrong.
100%.
God, when God leads us, it's like we get these ideas, just like you were saying, man, if someone would write, $10 million check, or, someone could free all the slaves in Pakistan for, a couple $1 billion, right? And we're like, that's how we think. And God's like, no, I've got another way to do it that's going to work so much better than what you could imagine. And so often, God is just waiting for us to follow him. And he's going, I've got this thing that I want to do. I need somebody who's willing to live by faith and follow into all these corners that you're going to get into. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Brandon, I would like you to tell me, how can people get in touch with you? Give us that. I'm going to post it on when I post it.
So just my website. So it's www.brandon, BRANDON. My last name is McNace, MCNACE.com. And go there, and we have through Planning Center. It's a nonprofit, so Planning Center, one of the biggest. Obviously, a lot of churches use it. That's the giving platform, and so you get a letter at the end of the year, all that type of stuff. And then on there, you'll see little tabs for my socials, Instagram, whatever. And so I have a lot of people that will just message me. And so just message me, and I'll reach. I don't have like an assist. It's not like I've got like a team and an assistant, and I got to get my assistant to set up. No, it's literally I'm opening up my phone. You're going to talk to me. And my office at my house is there's no overhead. So it's it's kind of fun, and people are like it just reach out to me, and I love having conversations, grabbing a phone call, whatever it is, and explaining things more. But really, just go to the website, sign up there to give, and I can't wait to see where this goes. And eventually we'll have the newsletter, talk about what we're doing for our giving partners and stuff like that. And I speak around the United States, so if eventually the website will have an area. It's like, hey, I'm going to be in this area. And then people are like, I've been giving to you for 2 years, and they can show up, it's wherever I'm speaking, at a church or something like that. And so, cause I'm an evangelist first, right? So yes, I'm doing all this amazing stuff in Pakistan, but I'm an evangelist first. And so my job is to empower and to equip and to speak into the local church. And so, so I travel a lot and do that. And so, go to the website, and then, just pray about it. I always encourage people to give to their local church. I never want to be the guy that robs from the church. That's not my job. But if God places something on your heart, it's like, I'd really like to support this, then go ahead and do it. But just go to the website.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for being with me today. Went a bit longer than I was planning, but man, I'm so glad we did this. This was really great to have you on here.